What is up, guys? Lord Nick here, bringing you another League of Legends related video. And if you happen to have noticed, I previously posted a video similar to this on my channel, and I ended up deleting it because as I rewatched it again, I just started disliking it more and more and thought maybe I could do better on my actual points that I was trying to make. And I noticed that I think some sleep deprivation made me repeat the same thing like a lot more than I thought I did. I ended up not liking it, and so I scratched it and said, alright, we're going to start over for like the 12th time. So, this video, guys, is going to be talking about coaching and the segregation of two different ideologies, I believe, that are of coaching that end up being a little bit more important to League of Legends as a whole. Sorry, I'm going to mute the master volume here because it kind of detracts me from my topics. So, anyhow, in terms of this coaching, I've been watching a lot of videos recently that come from the likes of LS, from Thorin, and there was even a Reddit post that got me thinking more and more about this topic. The topic of coaching has been something that has been kind of important to me over the past year or so. I've really kind of debated about going into coaching myself. But people similar to LS say that there's not really a lot of opportunity for somebody who is, in platinum to potentially go into coaching, or they don't see that opportunity being a popularized opinion, right? Like he previously touted that this was an opinion of his, that anybody could do it, but he took away that idea due to the fact that he believes there's a large skill and level gap that is needed and required for somebody to be a coach. I kind of disagree with the aspect of at least the skill expression aspect of it. As for the knowledge aspect, I believe there is still an integral need of knowledge in being a coach, but I believe that there's a lot of social skill knowledges and application of other versions of, I would say, intelligence in a way that is required to be a coach. A friend of mine also brought up that while he was watching the previous edition of this video, he felt like I went too deep dive into the knowledge aspect of it, and upon rewatching it, I really felt like I missed some of the key points that I wanted to talk about. So let's start off by addressing the two types of coaches. So what I would call a pro scene or a pro level coach is going to be somebody who is, well, in the pro scene of an esport game or just sports in general. These are the individuals that are needed to be either your head coaches, your analysts, your coordinators, your individuals that make up this entire scene. And I think a delegation of their jobs is the fact that, like, a head coach is somebody that you should be looking for that has a good mix of individual game knowledge and their individual ability to address difficult situations within the team. Right? Like a head coach is that person that you kind of rely on to allow for player coordination and cooperation a lot more. So then maybe the individualized coaches that you would see in like football. So for instance, in football, that's kind of the job of a head coach is you kind of group up all the players and then you're also kind of the mediator and middle ground for all the different coaches. So you take all these different individualized ideas within the game, right? Because there's different elements to the game. And in football, it's different positions. Your quarterback's going to have a lot more of the thought process behind their plays. Meanwhile, you have to teach and all of your other players the different routes that they have to run, the different formations they have to get in. And you kind of delegate this down to defensive coordinators, offensive coordinators, and then even higher or farther down the totem pole, you even have your quarterback coaches, your running back coaches, people that help with individualized positions that's even more specific to those specific roles on the team. And in esports, we don't get that far down. I mean, you have your analysts, you have your head coach, and then you have, I think they call them like what do they call them? They call there's another title for the coach right below the head coach, who's basically stage coach. I was about to say, you see them on stage. They're the stage coach. So these are people you see on stage that are generally helpers of the head coach. And depending on what team you're in, differs to, ends up changing the jobs of these individual coaches. And I think that that's also a big problem within the scene in League of Legends at large that doesn't really get discussed, is there's no real standardized idea of what these coaches' responsibilities are or separation of roles for these coaches. It kind of comes down on a team-by-team basis, which makes it very difficult to understand what the hell do we need in a head coach? What the hell do we need in these individual coaches? and what does it take to become a coach in the scene. So this is a kind of a problem of that there's a lack of communication from the scene itself to tell you what you need in these coaches. But the problem is that also the owners can't really tell you that, right? Like when you look at football and stuff like that, the coaching for it, kind of became kind of an organic growth thing over time. Probably back in the early days, coaching was very rudimentary. Very much you taught the fundamentals of the game, you held your players' hands when they started arguing with each other, and there was just kind of just core principles of, I'm here to make sure you guys play nice and make sure you guys understand what the hell you're playing on a basic level. And then over time, there's these, principles of theoreticals and conjecture that can be made by coaches. And oftentimes it kind of gets confused that the main principle of a coach is only conjecture. And in my last video, I accidentally really went deep dive into the fact that I believe that there's a lot of need for conjecture. And it is. I mean, theory crafting and conjecture, there is a huge need for it throughout the principles of the game, but the problem is that you also need a heavy balance of these other elements, right? You need to be able to socialize with your team. You need to be able to stop them from fighting and getting them on the same page. If you can't make synergy between these players, you can't rely on natural synergy. And I guess that's a topic in and of itself, that a video that I really wanted to make, but it kind of builds into this topic a little bit pretty well too, is that there's also multiple forms of synergy that can be found in a team, right? Like there's a natural synergy. LS talks about this on, I don't remember if it's in his stream or in his in the podcast that I was referencing about the other stuff where he talks about coaching. He talks about this idea of the fact that him and Shrimp were able to play, I think it was Maokai Cho'Gath together, and after a couple of games he knew exactly what direction he was going to use that Maokai Q to knock them, so he could guess where to put his Rupture Q to lock them down at. That's an idea and showcasing of natural synergy, and in time a lot of people can develop natural synergy as long as they are like-minded people. Note, you have to be kind of a like-minded person to build this synergy to a degree where it's past just a rudimentary amount of synergy. If you are not like-minded, you're both going to come up with different ideas and different concepts. And so that's where the coach comes in, right? They are not there to help build natural synergy. They're there to build the constructed or kind of like streamlined synergy that you see, that you get like seminars on, we have to build synergy and stuff. Coaches are kind of behind that, and the head coach generally has the primary responsibility for doing that for the entirety of the team. Because meanwhile, while the quarterback may not play with his defensive line at all, he might not play on the field at the same time of his defense. If his defense really, really hates him and they get really into a mental state where they hate this guy and they don't like how he talks, there's a good chance they could end up just throwing the game, not intentionally, but mentally they're in a bad spot. So it comes down to the coach to be able to help these players stay out of these bad spots, play nice with each other, as I've already said. And this is something that is needed in a pro scene. Now, as for the other type of coach that we have the pay-to-play coaches, right? That's what I call them, at least. These are your coaches similar to Nathan Mott, Zen Gaming, Coach Curtis, Pro Guides coaches, people that you pay to play for sessions with, and they sit down and they do VOD reviews, or maybe they play games with you, and they kind of tell you about the micro mechanics and maybe some basic macro mechanic stuff. But this is really one-on-one coaching, and this is really helping to teach people fundamental aspects. And now this can correlate to becoming a direct line for these people to kind of go into pro play and stuff like that. One of the examples that I make for this is the fact that Coach Curtis was a pro coach in the OCE. Now note, his teams never made it to Worlds, right? Like, he never got these teams to Worlds. And that's not to say that, this is all his fault or something like that. But the skill set that he practices and showcases in his videos is not the same skill set he's going to have to then use in pro play. And sometimes he does try to say, these are the things that I used with these players then. He also does videos where he works with Masters players, and so do these other guys where they work with Masters players. And a problem with that is that the skill sets they're trying to teach aren't going to be as relevant to the Masters players. These are kind of just a thing to showcase, like, look, I could get these guys to agree with me, and they believe in it, and it's kind of like hey, they're proving my point by agreeing with me. But they're not proving the point by showing you what you're saying for them to do, right? Like, you tell them to reposition and position yourself in this wave in this particular way, and it's going to receive this result. Well, you're not showcasing that result. You're not proving that result. You're just making conjecture. And making open conjectures is completely different than theorizing, right? Because with theorization, there's then an idea that you're going to do. You're making a hypothesis, and you're going to prove that hypothesis through actual play and determination of it. The likes of LS doing this in the fact of like his idea for these what he calls a cheater back, which is you push wave one, push wave two, and hit wave three, finish wave three, and immediately try to get your back off. And this allows you to go back, and while they're clearing wave three, you come back and you can catch the next wave. You haven't missed anything, and you have an item spike, and by that amount of pressure, they shouldn't have been able to back yet. This locks your opponent in the lane and gives you an item advantage. This is kind of my understanding of the concept. I might be doing it a disservice, and he might be, he should be able to explain it better because this is his concept. But this is my rudimentary understanding of his concept. Likewise, I can't really teach people this concept, right? Because I just admitted I don't have a whole enough of understanding of this concept, so I'd be a terrible coach for teaching this concept. But this is a theoretical opposed to a conjecture. He is making a theory, he is making an idea, and then he is proving this idea by he is showing it in his own games and having pro players on other teams who he has not coached who have done the same principles and using this to back up his analysis and his idea and his concepts. So this is theorizing opposed to making open conjecture. The likes of the people like Coach Curtis often will make open conjectures. One of those ones that I go to is he was showcasing a mid laner who I think was playing a Azir, and he told him he took a minion, and that minion was the wrong minion to take, because if he took a different minion on the other side of the wave, it would have pressured his opponent to have to go towards this other side of the wave, and this puts you closer to your jungler, and in its own part, it sounded like he was five-heading the hell out of it, but then when you actually look into it, it doesn't make any actual sense. There's so many, like, okay, you're saying, yes, he would have to move down here, but why? Well, because if he doesn't, he's going to take 3 hits from this minion. Well, but if I do this and I position this way, I'm going to take hits from his minions. Like, there's other aspects that he wasn't really looking at. It looked like he was just trying to service to make a theory point right there and then. But even just watching that video, it could get disproven, but the player himself couldn't disprove it because he didn't know and he respected this coach. So this opens up the opportunity for people to look at, in pro play, how many people do you have that are the Coach Curtises, right? Because Coach Curtis is a person who has taught in pro play. And the idea is that there's a lot of pro coaches that are much more closer to these idea of pay-to-play coaches. And again, this is me making kind of conjecture and opinion-based analysis based off of stuff that other people are talking about that are in the scene. I'm not in the scene, so I don't have this ear to the know of this knowledge, right? I'm just doing this off of other videos I've seen and other stuff like this. But there's this, but there's enough people saying it within the scene that there's got to be some type of element of some kernel of truth in this, at least a little bit, right? Like there's got to be at least a small element that there is a bit too much of this idea that there are these conjecture-based coaches. Everybody's just doing conjecture. They're not actually theorizing. They're not actually proving their theories. They're just coming up with concepts, and then they're waiting to see if the results actually prove it eventually. Like they're not testing it. They're not trying it out. They're just like, this is the concept. And then they take it into a game. It doesn't work and they throw it away. But they don't try to rough out the edges. They don't try to work with it. They don't try to fix it. And this is a big problem when you're trying to move into the pro coaching. Yes, you might be able to talk on a one-on-one basis with this person. You might be able to make conjecture, but if you can't turn conjecture into theorization, and you can't turn this talking to one-on-one person into teaching them the skill set they need to work as a team, because also you're teaching solo queue elements, right? Like they're teaching the elements of how to work by yourself with a group of 4 other people kind of being dragged along. And how you're supposed to build these incremental leads that will then lead you to being able to carry these people better. And in other cases, sometimes these pay-to-play coaches will also teach a little bit of what they consider like coordinated team play basics and stuff like that. And sometimes their videos do have some merit to them and actually have some legitimate value to them. But majority of the time, they are missing certain fundamentals that you don't get from solo queue. And most of the time their experience and what they're looking at and reviewing is solo queue. So if all you're reviewing is one form of the game, but it's a completely different game for the most part than what you get in actual pro play, how can you say that these people will be able to move up and progress into the next arc, which is professional coaching, pro scene coaching? So this is kind of a topic that gets into a little bit of dispute as to, the value of these type of coaches. Does because they can't go into becoming a pro coach, does that mean that they have no value in the scene? No, their value in the scene is helping out solo queue players and helping lower elo players get a better fundamental of the game, which then brings up the community and in turn can later on bring people who didn't have the abilities originally to start theorizing, start coming through with these ideas, because conjecture leads to theorization, right? Inevitably, when you're just making open conjectures, you should at one point or another figure out, wait, I can start proving these things by showing them. And by doing this, it's starting to make you better and starting to make you more creative, starting to make you think more. And it brings more than just base knowledge with it. It brings creativity. And then after that, to become a better coach, all you really have to start learning is to socialize better and how to help people in these social situations get along and work together as a team and actually work on these fundamentals of teamwork as well. Because FYI, that's another big aspect of coaching. So, yes, it opens the door with some of these base fundamentals you need to be a coach, but it doesn't teach you everything. So you can't just go from here, from being a pay to play coach and plug in as a head coach. Maybe you had those skills and so it does work out, and unfortunately in those type of situations you actually cause potentially more harm to the scene than you actually help. While you might help your team immediately, it also just tells people like that are owners who don't have an understanding of what it is, to the full understanding of what will make this coach be a good coach. See, like, oh look, we took this guy out of teaching solo queue scrubs how to be better. He did really well, so we'll just start picking up more coaches that way and start recommending people like this to them, and people he recommends obviously are going to do just as good. And so people start building a resume off of these ideas that this person did really well, so all of his friends are obviously going to do well. The people he'll vouch for are just as smart as him, are going to do just the same as him, and they may miss the reasons why he succeeds well at it and why his friends might not do well in that position. So, and that's not to say any fault to the owners or even to other coaches potentially who are starting to vouch for these guys. If you don't have a core understanding of what made you such a great coach, you can't always go around and say you can then teach the next generation of coaches, or that you can, vouch for the next generation of coaches, because if you don't have a full understanding of it, how the hell are we supposed to trust that you're going to bring in the next person? You might be accidentally a great coach, and that's fine, but we have to find ways to start being able to test coaches. You have to be finding a way that brings in the aspects of what makes a good coach and kind of adding together all of these elements that we've talked about. Can they handle players in hard situations with these players? Hot-tempered players, high management players, people who's like the Dardocs supposedly, who have bad attitudes and you have to turn it around. Can they manage, the fact that these players might know some aspects of the game a little bit better than you? And, can you balance the idea that this person might know very well what they want to do and this person may know what they want to do, and come together to make a compromise in a middle ground that works together? Can you teach them more fundamentals? Can you teach them maybe to theorize better and maybe move away from conjecture-based analysis and move them into theorization, right? Like, are you able to move them along, progress them to the next steps, and meanwhile also make sure that they don't devolve in the process, right? Like, just because you're learning new things, you can't forget the things you've already learned. So being able to re-drill the things they've learned, keep them learning, and keep them mentally stable and working together as a team, that's a lot to put on one person's plate. But, this is ultimately what it will take to be a coach. And then in those fields that you suck at, for instance, if you don't have all the game knowledge, if you don't have some of the best socialization skills or ability to break it down for them to understand, finding people who do and understanding you need those people on your team to do that, much like an NFL team system. Bringing people into your system that assist you in making that system stronger is not a weakness of a coach. It's a strength of a coach. Being able to admit you need help in those situations is going to help. And right now we have a lot of head coaches that maybe have one or two coaches beneath them, but they don't want to bring in more coaches because to them that breeds more competition, right? Think about it. A lot of the great coaching duos we've had then break up after only maybe a season or two together, and the person that was like the assistant coach is now a head coach of another team and trying to say that they know it all. because they worked well with this person, and with the two of them they gained success, but neither of them really realized it was because of the combination of the two. So, there's these elements that are going to require for what is needed for a pro synced coach. For pay to win coaches, I think that the argument that the Redditor that I haven't really mentioned yet brings up is a terrible argument. They argue that because they had some bad experiences with three or so coaches that were free coaches, by the way. He doesn't mention their ranks, he just says that none of them were diamond up. They only were able to assist him to get to silver. But by the way he was typing, by the way he was saying things, it really sounded like this player was an argumentative player that was refusing to listen. And there's only so much a coach can do when you have a player that actually refuses to listen. When you're looking in pro play and stuff like that, actively these people want to improve usually. But in solo queue aspect, you can run into people that say, I want to get better, but they don't want to admit they're wrong. And so being able to phrase it so that they don't feel like they're wrong, but they're still learning and adapting and becoming better is a key note of what makes a good coach. So people who are not diamond could potentially teach people who are in silver, bronze, iron, all the way to platinum, just because they themselves have that skill to break it down of, all right, take a break, buddy. Let's look at what went wrong. All right, so this went wrong. Don't fret. People make mistakes. Being able to talk them down from this high edge that they put themselves on, because that's kind of the general gist that is a big problem for a lot of these players, right? Is that, if you can't actually soothe them, if all you're telling them is, aha, shut up, get good, scrub, you need to listen to everything I say, they're not going to take it very well. Being tactful in how you approach it can do that. And so I think, at least in the solo queue aspect of coaches, the knowledge gate can actually be got rid of as long as you're not trying to teach past the knowledge you already know. Things that work, things that you can prove, things that are actually needed in the game, you can teach those elements. It's when they start making open conjectures, similar to that of the Coach Curtises and stuff like that, but don't have enough of a skill for this, to kind of hold some type of, actual proof of it, that you fall into problems. And even when they have that type of skill, making these open conjectures that are not, trying to move past the theory stage before even being tested, it can be a problem. So there are elements that you have to watch out for. There are places for these coaches, but I believe pretty much anybody can coach somebody who is technically worse than them, as long as you're following the simple idea that you understand you yourself are also not perfect. You need to keep moving and gaining your own knowledge and improving and becoming more creative and coming up with new concepts. And then working towards a mutual goal of helping the person you're doing this with. Don't do this just to prove that you think you are very smart and to prove your points, right? Like that's a very narcissistic reason to be coaching someone. And if that is your only means, or your only means is to get money off of this, that's a very predatory way of doing this. If you have a goal in this to help the person that you are coaching, you yourself can become a better coach in the long run. If your goal is to make money and do this as an easy job, that's a predatory nature, and it's going to be more damning for the scene and more damning for you in the end. Sure, you might be able to make money in the short run, but the long term of it, you're going to be a worse coach. You're not going to be able to keep a long-term job because of it, because you'll start building up a name for yourself being that guy that just charges people tons of money and doesn't actually do anything. And so like you'll run into problems in the long run with it. So the idea that you have to have some predetermined set skill amount, I will admit, I was very hard-grained trying to fight the idea that you need to have a lot of knowledge. But to be honest, you need to have enough knowledge to be able to teach somebody, and knowing where you fall in. There's always a need for like little league coaches and people that can teach to a certain level. You're not going to just immediately take a little league coach and make him, the next NFL head coach. He's got to move up the ladder to a degree, showcase that he has an understanding of how the game progresses past the point of fundamentals, and then his ability to also work with, adults, right? Like it's different teaching a group of kids than it is teaching an adult. There's going to be some stupid petty amount of arguments that might, carry over to a degree, but your ability to change and adjust to the group that you're with also proves just how good of a coach you are as well. And so like lastly, guys, LS also made a comment in his podcast with Nemesis about the fact that he feels like, there should be, you don't have to be pro rank, but you have to be enough to prove it in game. And while you yourself, yes, it makes it easier to be able to prove it in game, I don't think this is a necessity for a coach per se. You have somebody like Greg Popovich, for instance, is an old man as a coach. Like even in his current years, he's still a great coach. But I don't know if his strength really lies in the fact that he can go and dunk on the Tim Duncans and the Tony Parkers and the Manu Ginobili's of his teams. He has to be able to get respect from them, which he does. He has to make them take accountability, which he does. And then on top of that, he teaches them to work as a team. And then he also teaches the core fundamentals of the game that they already know, re-drills these things, makes them learn from their mistakes, and potentially brings in new creative ideas of plays that they can make. Basketball being a terrible example because there's only so many real weird plays that you can make in the game other than, passing and shooting the ball. But, there's a lot of different passes I guess you could do, who you pass it to, how you shoot it. There's some elements, I guess there is some room for creativity to it, but like it feels like League of Legends has more room even for that creativity. You have 150 some odd champions. You have 10 different champions in a game. Your abilities each have 4 abilities at least, and so like you're going to be playing them differently depending on who you're playing against. You're going to be, using them differently from who's on your team and what your role on the team is. Because meanwhile, while you're playing Gragas, in some games you might be the primary engage, but other games you might be the peel you might be trying to peel for your backline. There's going to be different ways that a champion can be played. There's different avenues for creativity and different things that you can start thinking about how you played it and how you do it. And so I think, creativity might be a little bit more important in this game per se, but, still, for the analogy aspect of it, there's still a level of creativity that the coaches have to be able to instill within their players. And of course, all the other things that they have to instill with them as well. And hopefully, guys, and this video has been somewhat enlightening to my opinion to a degree. If you couldn't figure it out, the summarization of my opinion is that I feel like any person could really become a good coach. You just have to actually acknowledge what it is required to become a coach. Coaches in all games require the same skill sets. They just adapt slightly differently to the knowledge that is also required in those games. League of Legends is a very knowledge-heavy game, thus I believe the coaches in League of Legends have to have a higher knowledge about the game than, per se, their counterparts in other sports. And, their need for being able to socialize with their players, bring down hard concepts to their players, being able to get their team to work together, and being able to have them, think and rationalize out concepts and theories for themselves, along with bringing new ideas yourself to the table, and then being able to work with a teamwork of coaches that also allows you to shore up the weaknesses within your own ability as a coach. I think are just all elements that are going to be great for, pro scene people, and then for individuals that want to be, like the Nathan Motts and the Zen Gaming guys out there. If you want to be that style of coach, then just really shore up your fundamentals and what it takes to be good in solo queue. And don't always go for tons of conjecture when you're teaching people. It's one thing to be able to theorize and come up with new concepts and ideas for yourself, but until you can actively prove those ideas and make sure that those concepts make sense in a solo queue aspect and are relearnable by other people and weren't just flukes that happened, kind of stick away from those ideas. Just keep drilling the fundamentals, teaching people, and don't go above what your knowledge level is. If you were a plat player, teach them to become a plat player. Don't tell them you're going to make them a masters player. Don't market yourself to something you aren't, because that's just going to hurt you in the long run. And guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you like this rendition of it. I think that this is a better version of the video, honestly, and I'm really happy that I decided to remake this one. I'm actually really happy my friend reached out to me, because I did not realize how many of the core values that I think are present and needed in coaching I did not mention in the last edition of this video. And so hopefully you guys really enjoy this. And if you did, please leave a like and a comment, subscribe to the channel. And if you have questions or such, please leave those down below as well. And I hope to see you guys in the next video. And until then, I hope you all have yourselves a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye, guys.